Here's a special important message.
Well, hello there. Welcome to We Are the Road Crew, the podcast which takes you backstage, behind the scenes, into the world of live music and giving you some of the best stories about some of the artists that you love from the people that helped put their shows on. My name's Stephen Hill. Sorry if I seem a little bit flustered at the start. Maybe it's because I'm slightly starstruck by our guest this week, who is a gentleman by the name of Dan Hawcroft. I'm going to tell you about Dan in a second. Before I do go any further, I should just say a very big thank you to our friends at Signature Brew, who have our backs. They're our buddies. They got our six, to coin a military term. They have been lovely helping us out, supporting us in the podcast here. They make award-winning beers like their famous all-night IPA, which is fittingly called Roadie for this podcast, which is dedicated to road crews around the world. They've been brewing music-inspired beers since 2011, supporting live music. I've always mentioned their collaborative lagers that they do. The likes of Mastodon, Idol, Slaves, Mogwai, Enter Shikari, and many more do have specialist drinks as made by Signature Brew. They recently did one by Jamie Lenman, who is not a drinker, so he did a lemonade. I like that a lot. That was good. You can get 10% off of their delicious beverages by using the code ROADCREW in the checkout at signaturebrew.co.uk. Anyway, thanks very much for coming on board and listening to the podcast this week. We've only got a couple of episodes left. I hope you've enjoyed this series of the podcast, and we are going out big with Dan Hawcroft. Dan spent 8 years as Lemmy's PA and road manager. He was the man who basically got a genuine rock god out of bed, got him to do all this stuff, helped him get on stage, helped him perform. I'm imagining spent most of his life with one of the great rock stars of all time. I am a huge fan of Motörhead. I will probably bring this up a fair bit during our interview. One of my treasured memories I have is standing by the side of the stage when I was emceeing the Metal Hammer Golden God Awards in 2013, and being stood near Lemmy's amp was just an unbelievable, incredible experience. Just seeing that name, Motörhead, seeing that logo on that amp, knowing that guy was going to plug in and play, an unbelievable thrill. So to spend 8 years doing all those things for Lemmy, I am really, really, really excited to talk to Dan. So I'm going to stop this fluffing and I'm going to get straight to it. We should say normally we record at Factory Studios in the heart of central London. Obviously, due to the pandemic, we can't do that at the moment. I'm in my kitchen, but that is where we usually record. We should also say, if you enjoy this chat, please follow us on our socials. So it's at Road Crew Pod on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook as well. Give us a little like and a thumbs up on wherever you get your podcasts, and we would be very much appreciative of that. But enough. Let us talk to Dan Hawcroft, 8 years as Lemmy's PA and road manager. I'm excited. Here he is. All right, Dan has joined me from Canberra, Australia, I believe, Dan.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Foggy Canberra tonight. It's really foggy out here. It is, yeah.
I mean, it's first thing in the morning. I'm doing that boring time zone thing that you always do when you talk about, oh, it's the morning here. Is it the evening where you are? That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. The world's round.
yeah, correct. So we're not going to waste too much time on what the different times we're recording this in is. Yeah. But just before we kind of get into your full story, how long have you been in Australia? How are you finding it? And how did you get there?
So we got here on a plane.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
We've been here 3 years now, and we kind of got here. So my missus is Australian, and by virtue of that, my little girl's Australian as well. And she kind of wanted to come home, and I fancied a change of pace, and loving it out here. Canberra's a weird place. It's almost like the Milton Keynes of Australia. It really is. It's literally like Milton Keynes, but with cockatoos.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, Australia's. I mean, we're like probably an hour's drive from some of the most beautiful coast I've ever seen, and just absolutely love it. The quality of life's really good, and good beer, good people as well, good gigs.
Good. Well, I feel like that's kind of a tease for where we're going to go later on. But let's start off right at the very, very start of your story. Can you remember as a child the first time music impacted you, and particularly live music, the first time you actually saw music live and what that sort of did to your psyche?
Yes and no. So the first gig that I ever went to was with my sister, and it was Gary Newman. And
oh, wow.
I was really... Yeah. My sisters, I think they're called Newmanoids, who are like big Gary Newman fans. And she's a huge Gary Newman fan, and I went along with her at Hull City Hall. And I think I'm not a huge Newman fan, but if I remember rightly, he had like a big glass spider type stage prop, like kind of production, kind of lots of moving truss and stuff. Yeah. And that's probably my first vivid memory of a live production and a live event. And to say that I was super excited about it, I was, but I ended up falling asleep before the end of the gig because I was that young. I think I probably stuck it out until he played Cars, and then I nodded off a bit.
He surely ended with Cars, didn't he? Surely. I
don't know. My sister's probably good. Yeah, she's probably got the set list noted down somewhere. She's a huge Newman fan.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably other than that, it would be local gigs, like seeing local bands play in Hull. And Hull, so yeah, Hull's a very working class town, but it's got as in a lot of those places where there's a lot of low income things, like arts is really prevalent, and music is definitely in Hull. And I guess in Hull, people would be, if you're in a band, the things that people would compare you to would be like the House Martins and people like that, no matter what music that you play. But because the House Martins were the biggest thing from Hull. So I've kind of digressed a little, but I guess to answer your question, the thing that really impacted me was local gigs more than anything. Because especially where Hull is, we didn't get a lot of bands coming through as such, like bands as well, not bands that I'd want to see.
So, I was actually looking at your kind of bio before we started, and it was the kind of, like I think so many people, that when you say local scenes, it was sort of the punk and ska and hardcore kind of elements of stuff that you were most getting into. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So I think I probably put my first punk show on when I was about 15. And yeah, so the local bands in Hull would be bands like, Freaks Union and stuff like that. But the music that was influencing us from like the wider area would be, for sure, like punk stuff. Kind of like newer punk stuff, not like Sex Pistols-y stuff, but, bands like... probably a lot of US stuff like Gorilla Biscuits and Minor Threat and Black Flag and bands like that were the bands that we were into. And a lot of that came out of skateboarding, to be honest. Yeah. So me and all my friends were kind of, I'd say huge skateboarders, but not very good skateboarders. Loved that kind of music and stuff. And then, again, with kind of, I was never a huge fan of ska punk, other than a few bands who did it without overusing brass and did it really well. There's some really good bands like Inner Terrestrials and stuff that kind of resonated with me. But yeah.
Well, two of the bands that I wanted to talk to you about, and I know that, again, I've read on your bio, Lightyear from Leeds played My Village back in the kind of, must have been about 2001. And that was super exciting. Again, a proper kind of DIY band. I know I'd read that you did quite a bit of stuff with Lightyear. They seemed like a bit of a long forgotten band at this point, but I thought they were great personally.
Yeah, I never did that much with Lightyear. I was more with Capdown. So Capdown was the band that I spent probably about 10 years with. Like Lightyear, we did a lot of stuff because they were on Household Name Records. So we did a lot of tours together and stuff like that. And they were a very messy band. A lot of stories. I'm sure it's been told a million times, but that story of them at Leeds Festival in the pantomime horse, going into Ice-T's dressing room and asking for sugar and shit like that, and I interviewed Chaz from Lightyear a few years ago, and he told us a story about the pantomime horse and going on stage with body count, which is amazing. Yeah, he said apparently Ice-T had said he was going to shoot him, so that that's true.
Feels like a badge of honour. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we were stood outside the dressing room at the time, and I think the exact words were something like, "Get out of my dressing room, motherfucker, or I will shoot you." That was the exact phrase he said to him. But Chaz is a good guy. But...
I was actually going to bring up Capdown as well, because I know you did more work with them. I listened to Civil Disobedience completely apropos of nothing about 2 weeks ago. Brilliant band. I thought they were an absolutely brilliant band. And what you say about the kind of the lack of brass in ska was they used their kind of sax quite sparingly, didn't they?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that was through necessity. So when you've got a singer and a sax player who's the same guy, you know, he can't do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And that, to me, was one of the endearing things about Capdown. And the fact that they were pulling all these different influences like old school punk and ska and reggae and dub and drum and bass and all these things and putting them all in one thing. And a lot of them, because of the age when they recorded Civ Dis, they didn't know about those influences. They were just, you know, just grabbing them almost out of the air. I mean, if you speak to like Keith, the guitarist, he's just a huge Guns N' Roses fan. That's what he grew up on, was Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. But then when you put him in with Boob, who loves dub and reggae and all this stuff, and then you've got Jake, who plays the sax and loved hardcore, and Tim, who's just a beast of a hardcore drummer, and you've got them together, it just made this amazing music. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was a privilege to tour with those guys at that time. It was one of those things where you actually felt like you were part of a movement, you know, and they're few and far between.
Yeah, I was going to sort of bring that up actually, because I mean, this was around the time my band was never as big as Capdown by any stretch of the imagination, but I was in a sort of small band going around playing shows around this time, and the swell of what had been kind of grunge and nu metal dominated US rock music, and those rock bands not really being allowed into the sort of Britpop party that was happening in the 90s. When you got round to the sort of the year 2000 and onwards, it suddenly felt like, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, that local bands and underground bands and British bands like Capdown, like 100 Reasons, like Raging Speedhorn, Lost Prophets, whoever else you want to kind of, Funeral for a Friend, whoever else you want to add in, it was the first time those bands were starting to get talked about and treated in the same way as big American bands. How was that change for you, kind of being in and around the scene at that time? Yeah, and how kind of influential and how weird was that to you as well?
Yeah, it was a little bit weird. I think, especially because it was a time when, and it was a really good time to be involved in live music, where everybody was legit, like everybody was really cool and really nice, and dicks got outed pretty quickly. So it was nice to be in that scene, and then to see bands like you say, like 100 Reasons, just like, I mean, the space of them blowing up was, from my memory, a couple of weeks. We did like a tour, like Capdown toured with 100 Reasons on the Corporation tour.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. And that tour went from being tiny venues to being huge venues, like within a few weeks. It was just upped and upped and upped and upped. And it just became this thing of like, the momentum behind them was incredible. And even, I mean, I still like kind of speak to those guys today, and it's amazing how they went through all that and still stayed legit, you know? And the same with bands like, you know, Hell is for Heroes as well.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? I mean, yeah, they blew up. I mean, obviously, like a couple of those guys had been in Symposium prior to that, so had experienced it. But for me, yeah, I mean, it was really weird. It was really weird, especially to go from playing, you know, like little squat venues and stuff and little DIY shows to then be actually doing real shows that have, you know, runners and stuff like that, and you're like, wow, this is a bit weird. And especially, you know, because at the time I'm still doing Capdown stuff, and we're still in the same van and still doing the same things every night, and it's, you know, the same old raggedy van, and you're pulling up to these venues that are now so much bigger. So it was weird, but it was super exciting.
Yeah, it really was. For your story as well, I mean, presumably you mentioned the influence of DIY hardcore and Minor Threat and Black Flag and that whole scene. I mean, when I was in a band, and when we started, I never really believed that there was any kind of future or any kind of career opportunity for me. At what point did you start thinking, while you were putting these gigs on and while you were kind of tour managing these bands and helping these bands, at what point did you start thinking, oh, there might actually be some level of career stroke longevity in this?
Probably midway through it. So for me, to be honest, I kind of lived at my band's practice room for a while. And that's when I was putting on shows, and one of the bands that I put on was Capdown, and they stayed at my practice room on the night. It was Capdown Against All Authority and a local band that we put on. So I had Against All Authority and Capdown staying at my band's practice room. We were all sleeping on the floor. And we had a really good night. We were just jamming out Operation Ivy songs and stuff like that. And then the Capdown guy said, you should come on the road with us. And that's pretty much what I did. And to me, it was more like job avoidance than a job, to be honest. It was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I kind of packed a bag that night and we just went off, and I started off just helping them drive the van and then doing a bit of merch, then guitar teching, and kind of worked my way up. So I learned kind of every bit of the job on the way. At
what point after that did you start thinking, I might try and, where did you go after that? Like, did you trying to get in with other bands and going, I can actually maybe do this for a living? I
mean, the definitive turning point for me was probably after a while of Capdown stuff, when Jake found out that his son Karen was on the way, and they weren't going to be touring as much as they were. I think we've averaged about 310 shows a year with Capdown, and it was going to be now, especially because they got to the point where they've now got a decent booking agent and they're now doing actually promoted tours rather than just trolling around. We're going to be picking and swapping. So the point for me when I first thought I could make a job out of it was when I ended up doing Kasabian.
What year was that when you started doing Kasabian?
So it was, let me think, I think it'd be probably about 99, 2000-ish.
Right.
It was just as the first album was coming out. So the first tour that I did with them was supporting Cooper Temple Claws.
Oh, right. A band who I was going to say ripped off then, but I mean, they probably didn't rip them off, but they sound a hell of a lot like them. I'm always saying, it's weird that you say Cooper Temple Claws, because I'm always like, oh man, why aren't the Cooper Temple Claws massive? They just sound like Kasabian, and Kasabian seem to get massive afterwards. But anyway, that's a digression from my part. I love that first Cooper Temple Claws record. I mean, Kasabian, that was, as much as I talk about kind of 100 Reasons getting big and, Capdown getting in Kerrang or whatever, I mean, Kasabian is a band who were getting Noel Gallagher turning up to their shows, and they were front page of the NME and obviously ended up headlining Glastonbury. How different was it going from kind of DIY hardcore bands at heart, even though they started to behave a little bit more professionally, to go into a band who were, I would imagine Kasabian kind of had their eyes on the prize from day one?
You'd be surprised.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, there was a very definitive driving force behind that band, which was Serge. Mm-hmm. It was Serge's band. He wrote all the music, wrote all the lyrics, and the rest of the guys were committed, but it was still a jolly, as it were. It wasn't strictly business by then, but there was a lot of stuff that I picked up from working with them that I took on and still deal with today. So now, I mean, these days I work in marketing, and working with Kasabian was the first time I ever experienced actual full-on marketing with a band, from what their management and what their label were doing and how they did it. So I learned a lot of lessons with that. But as far as like the band, I mean, you've got to remember back then, especially, I mean, on that Cooper Temple Claws tour, we were just in a splitter van, and they just had, they're all tatty gear, and, the keyboards were on literally a pasting table. We had a pasting table that all the electronics lived on. So it certainly wasn't the huge production that they have now. It was the start of that. And those guys, they all lived together on a big farm, which was really weird. They all literally lived in this big room together, and it was part of this guy's farm, and the recording studio was there. And so I mean, it was almost, there was elements of norm there, because those guys had obviously, they're huge music fans, so there's obviously a common bond there with everybody who works in music and everybody who plays music, where you always find a common ground, at least something you can chat about, and get on well with those guys. So I mean, they were good guys, and it was good to see them blow up. It was a bit of a shock for me when they were blowing up, so I at that point, readdressed the situation for me. But the time that I had with them was cool as fuck.
Were you there when it was kind of starting to happen? I mean, could you see that starting to happen? Did you have any idea they would get as big as they did get?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yeah. So it was great to see. It's like I say, it's what really kind of gave me a love of marketing, to see how that band was marketed was really interesting. So they were almost marketed to people as it was like, you haven't heard of this band, you're missing out. Like you're clearly behind the times, you're not cool anymore. When nobody had heard of that band, it was such a cool way that they were marketed at the time, that it was almost like, you haven't heard of Kasabian? You must be an absolute piece of shit. Like, and when the reality was at the time nobody had, but everybody was like, I don't want to be a piece of shit. I'm going to go check this band out. So it was just really cool how they did it. And even when we were going to gigs, they did stuff like, in the UK you get those little like yellow AA signs that point to different events.
Yeah.
Everything, all of the gigs had one of those signs on a lamppost just with the Kasabian logo on it.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and just pointing, and they'd only be up for like that day of the gig. So I don't know who was putting them up, but it was incredible because A, at the time there was no sat nav, so you could just host straight to the venue following these signs. But B, it made it more of an event, you know. So there was a lot of lessons I picked up from that, which were really cool. How
do you look back at that time, particularly for that type of music in general? I mean, I kind of lament that kind of mid-noughties indie period. I think there were some really good bands like Block Party Editors. I think Kasabian's first couple of albums were great. Maximo Park were really good as well. But it felt like a lot of the stuff that started to get into the chart from the sort of the UK rock bands and the UK indie bands became a little bit flaccid. I thought it was a time where sort of everybody suddenly started to get pushed as the next Oasis or the best new thing or the new Strokes or whatever. What are your thoughts when you think back to sort of being in and around that period yourself?
I think you're right. I mean, it certainly became a little bit formulaic with stuff like that, and which is I think why Kasabian stood out from that a little because their promotions, it wasn't as formulaic. But yeah, I mean, most of that time, to be honest, like we were doing a lot of festivals and a lot of gigs, so it's almost like having your head in the sand. You get caught in this little bubble where you're going between festivals and going between gigs, and you don't really see other shit other than what's going on your stage for that day. But no, I agree. There was, there was a lot of fallout from the Blair and Oasis war, where people were, like you say, they were trying to find the next Blair or the next Oasis and stuff like that. Whereas, I mean, I was always with Oasis. I don't know who were you with in that war?
Blur.
Oh.
Yeah, big time. Blur, Oasis won the battle, but Blur won the war. Blur have gone on definitely to be a far more interesting band than Oasis. Surely. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. They were always more of an interesting band, but I don't know. I always liked fun bands, and I thought Oasis were always really fun.
Yeah. So around that period, obviously, you're sort of in the music industry. I believe one of the big kind of chance encounters and one of the big sort of road marks in your life happened when you were working with Nick Oliveri's Mondo generator. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that all happened by chance, to be honest. Another kind of Yorkshire roadie guy when I was working with Capdown, he was working with a band called This Girl from Sheffield.
Oh, I love This Girl. Love those guys. Yeah, my band used to play with them. Brilliant. Lovely men.
Yeah, so good. Like Ryan, the drummer, incredible. Like
I love Ryan.
Yeah, totally. Their kind of like crew guy was a guy called Evil Dave, really good guy. Who now I'm not sure who he works with now, but he in turn at one point ended up working for Kasabian. But he called me up one day and was like, "Look, I've double booked. Like, can you cover a tour for me?" Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Yeah, what is it? And he was like, "Oh, it's with Nick Oliveri. Oh, by the way, they're supporting Motörhead." I'm like, fuck, yeah, I'm down for that. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I ended up kind of getting involved with Nick. At the time, Mondo Generator, I guess Nick used to have a different band for each territory, and what he would do. So for like UK and Europe, it was, do you remember the band Winnebago Deal?
I do, yeah. Two-piece from Oxford, sort of garage rock thing, yeah.
Yeah, so it was basically Winnebago Deal with Nick Oliveri, and that was Mondo Generator at that time.
Ah, right, okay. Nick Oliveri's got a reputation of being quite a wild man of rock. How did you find him?
I actually found him to be a bit of a pussycat, to be honest. Really? Okay. Yeah, definitely. I mean, super nice guy. He obviously does like to rage a little bit, and he's definitely, and I think a lot of that and a lot of his reputation comes from the fact that he's a really caring dude. Like he genuinely really cares about the music that he plays and the people who come to his shows and things like that. And I think if anybody offends that, that's generally when he plays up. From what I've heard, that's what a lot of that kind of fallout from the Queen stuff comes out with Nick, was that if people were fucking with him, he would fuck with them back. But generally, if he's got his solid crew around him, super nice guy.
All right, okay. So you're out with those guys, as you said, supporting Motörhead, which, I mean, that must have been quite an incredible tour.
It was absolutely incredible. So it was just the German leg. So we went out and did all the Germany stuff. And for me, like, just to hark back to your first question when you were asking about what was the first band that had an impact on me live, the first band that I can clearly remember as a kid is watching Motörhead on the Young Ones.
Yeah.
So that's probably the first time that music like kind of spoke to me out of the TV, and like being at a super young age and just like being like, fuck me, that's a band. So like to now be kind of on the support tour with that was incredible. And just seeing how such a well-oiled kind of rock and roll long-term machine rolled was, really educational as well. I mean, it was just ridiculous. Like some of the shit we got up to was just ridiculous.
Care to share, or is that best left? what stays on the road?
No, from the Mondo stuff. I mean, before we get onto the Motörhead stuff, like we had this. Nick had a lot of friends who were in kind of the US Air Forces, a lot of US Air Forces bases out in Germany. So instead of getting hotels some nights, we'd end up at these guys kind of almost like accommodation blocks. And they were just crazy, like big pools and saunas and shit. And we're just getting just ridiculously smashed up in all this stuff. And or we'd go onto like these, so they're called Spielertechs, which is like German casinos. But they're always like these casinos with a strip club next to them, and Nick would just come in and be like, I've got a feeling for some spieling, let's go for it. And we just go out after the show and just get fucking annihilated and end up and doing stuff like that. But there's a lot of long drives on that tour as well, and we were in this tiny little van, and so there was a lot of debauchery, but a lot of hard work on it as well. Yeah,
it sounds great. And I mean, getting to see Motörhead every night is the dream as well, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think from a crew perspective as well, just getting to kind of hang out with those guys at that time, like the Motörhead crew was absolutely amazing, because there was a lot of the original Motörhead crew there. You know, there's people like Eagle and Hobbsy and stuff like that, who it was amazing to just kind of watch them in action, as it were. It was fucking brilliant.
Well, I mean, obviously our podcast is named after the song commemorating those people. So we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about Motörhead, obviously. Tell us about what happened next with you then, especially in regards to your relationship with Lemmy and with Motörhead.
So I guess the next thing for me was how I ended up working with Motörhead, which was kind of like halfway through the Mondo tour. Like Eddie, Motörhead's tour manager, came up to me and was like, "Oh, what have you got on after this?" And I'm like, "I've got some stuff on mine." He's like, nothing. And then the next day, he was like, "Oh, that stuff you've got on, like, do you think you could maybe drop it?" And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Oh, no, it doesn't mind. And then the next gig, he would be like, so it was like this long, drawn-out process. Right. And then the next gig, he's like, "Oh, yeah, cool. Maybe we should have a bit of a chat, like, before this tour ends and stuff." And I'm like, why is that? And he's like, "Oh, no, it doesn't matter. And then he comes up one day and, like, he has a chat. And one of the drum techs, a guy called Alex Palmy, who I'll be forever grateful to, had said, this dude's like running all of this shit on his own. We need to get him on our crew. And we had it's probably the first and only kind of roadie gig that I've ever had an actual interview for, which I didn't know was going to be an interview at the time. And found out later on that a lot of the shit that I was told in that interview was absolutely made up. It was just absolutely made, just to wind me up. So it was this interview with it was Eddie and a guy called Freddie, who was currently doing the PA road manager role for Motörhead, who was leaving to go and tour manage In Flames. And so it was with him, and he told me this stuff of like, I get up in the morning, I listen to classical music, and then I go for a jog, and then I wake Lemmy up, and then, and then we do all this press stuff, and then I go out for a nice restaurant meal, and it was all bullshit. I only found that out later on. But so I had this interview with them, and he kind of said to me, we want you to come and work for Motörhead. And I just thought that they were going to be like, emptying the fucking bins at the end of the night or something. And I was like, doing what? And he was like, road manager in Lemmy's PA. And I was like, in my head, I can still remember it now. I thought about the Young Ones thing, and I thought about it, and I was like, I can't say no to this. I was like, yes, double yes. So the next step of that process was meeting Lemmy, kind of in a one-to-one situation. Obviously, like being on the Mondo tour, said all right to him, said hello a couple of times, and he talked to Nick a lot. But the first thing that he did was, so after one of the gigs, and it was Munich, I believe, he kind of came in this room and shoved his thumb in my mouth. I was like, what's that? And it was full of speed. Like, it was absolutely full of speed. And he was like, "Are we going out for a drink then, boy?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah, cool." So me and him then went to this strip club, and at this strip club, he gave me €500 and told me to have a good night. And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, even if this opportunity I never get again, even if nothing comes of this job, even if nothing comes for it, I'm going to have a fucking good night." So that's what I did, and I was getting lap dances and getting him lap dances and buying drinks and sending all this stuff around. And then he came up to me and was like, "Yeah, you got the job." And I was like, because I'd gone on this rager basically, and he said that the last guy that they did that to pocketed the money and sat at the bar drinking Diet Cokes all night.
What an idiot! What an idiot!
Totally, yeah. You only get a few of those opportunities in your life, and you need to embrace them. So yeah, that was kind of the first thing for that. But I actually had to, because I was still officially on. I was still on the Mondo tour. So after that, I had to drive. I drove the van back from. No, actually, it would have been the show before that happened, because I drove back from the Munich Zenith to Oxford in one run to then go and meet the Motörhead tour bus afterwards, which was absolutely killer. It was like 27 hours solid driving of me being super excited, a little bit hungover, and just, it was just a lot of road to cover. But yeah, that was probably how I got into it. And then, so I don't know if you know about Lem's history stuff, like about how he loves history and his military stuff.
I do, yeah. I'm familiar with that, yes.
Okay, cool, yeah. So that was the first thing we actually bonded with. So it's a little bit controversial right now, but I'm actually like a huge supporter of Antifa. Mm-hmm. And I always have been, and that stems from my early punk days. I'm militantly left-wing and very anti-fascist. And the first time that I met Lem, I was wearing an Antifa jumper. And he was like, "Well, you can fucking take that off, boy." And I was just like, and I thought he was serious. And I was like, well, maybe we should have a proper chat about this. Like, I'm militantly anti-fascist. Like, what? I know that you collect all this stuff. Like, what are your views on it? And he said that, well, a lot of the time people confuse like his collecting with his political beliefs, and that he thinks the reason that he collects that stuff is that people shouldn't forget it so that it never happens again. Which to me was a very good answer, So that was kind of like the first thing we bonded around in the start of our relationship. That and kind of British comedies. Yeah,
I know he's passionate about both those things. For someone who's such a kind of huge, legendary character, who is if you were to pick the sort of Mount Rushmore of metal and have four people, he'd almost definitely be in the conversation, arguably be one of the people on that Mount Rushmore for heavy metal, even though I will talk about how he felt about that terminology in a little bit. But he seems like...
I was just going to correct you then, but I'll leave it to it.
I know, yeah. But he always seems like such a kind of down-to-earth, normal bloke when you think of, Ozzy and the circus that surrounds Ozzy Osbourne, or how massive, and like the Lars Ulrich collecting art and stuff. And then you got Lemmy like talking about Monty Python and just wanting to ride around in the tank. He just seems like a really kind of quintessentially English eccentric. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Like there's obviously I always said to people, I worked for Ian Kilmister. There's Lemmy from Motörhead and there's Ian Kilmister, and it's very hard to separate the two a lot of the time, but a lot of the time it wasn't as well. Like he was a super well-read dude, and like you say, I absolutely loved his old British comedies like The Goon Show. Like him and his bass tech Tim could just like verbatim repeat entire episodes of The Goon Show, and you'd just be sat there going, I have no fucking clue what you're talking about right now. And they'd be talking in these funny voices, like they do it perfect, absolutely perfect. And one of the first things that happened with him was, not happened, but he said to me was like, I don't like rock stars. I've met enough of them. That's one of the first things he ever said to me is, I don't like rock stars. Brilliant. And he lived his life that way. Like there's times where we'd be going into shows and people are trying to get at him, and he'd be like, stop, and he'd just open the door so like a young girl could come through or a woman could come through. So he was definitely very old school like that, but also given that this was after all of the rock and roll excess and the Guns N' Roses and all this stuff and blah 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 blah, it was almost, even though it was very old school, it was still very refreshing at the time. So because there wasn't many bands of that generation left going.
Yeah, That's quite an interesting point when you bring up stuff like Guns N' Roses, because, I mean, I think the other thing to mention with Lemmy is, from what I know, he didn't really, in terms of how he lived his life, he didn't really change very much at any point in his life, really, did he? He didn't kind of go, well, I got to get into yoga, like Duff McKagan's into yoga now and he's a vegan, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers are all eating tofu rather than taking heroin, but but it felt like Lemmy just kind of carried on going, I can have a smoke, I can have a drink, I can do what I've always sort of done. I don't know to what extent that continued. I mean, you probably know better than me, but it really felt like he didn't really ever change how he approached anything, really. Yeah,
definitely. I think he found what he loved very early on in life and stuck with it. He was definitely a creature of habit. So yeah, I mean, his Jack and Cokes, he absolutely loved those. And I think, I mean, after when I finished working with Motörhead, I think he did kind of chill it a little bit. But yeah, he used to work, because officially I'd be waking him up, but a lot of the time he would have been up all night, so he would wake me up. And he always used to wake me up with a cigarette and a Jack and Coke every morning. Like, are you up, boy? And so yeah, he was definitely a creature of habit. And he didn't really buy into all that kind of, I'm going to change my ways. He was an old dog who refused to learn new tricks.
Yeah, very refreshing. I heard a story once, and I hope I mean I don't know if you'll know if this is true, but it does it sound like the sort of thing it might be true. I heard that from a writer for Metal Hammer magazine went to pick him up for the start of a European tour. Apparently, he was in LA and he knocked on his door and he said, we've got to go and get a flight. And Lemmy sort of woke up, all the sort of curtains were closed, and he came to the door and he was all sort of hungover and he had his hair sort of strapped down his face and he was wearing clothes from the night before. And this guy opened the door and he said, Lem, what are you doing? We've got to get a flight to Europe to start this tour. And he went, all right, okay, come on then. And he just shut the door and walked out the door and started walking down the path to leave that very second. And when this guy went, whoa, you're going to be gone for like 3 months, Lemmy went, oh, right, okay, hold on. Opened the door, went inside, came back out a minute later, but he was holding an orange.
Yeah. So
that was it.
Yeah, okay. I don't know how true that one is. I know that he was certainly minimal on tour. Yeah, so he didn't have stage clothes, he just had his clothes. Right. They were just what he was wearing that day, and it just happened to be what he always wore on stage. So he never had stage clothes with him. He just had, But then he always had a packed bag as well. So he'd have a bag that was his tour bag. So like when we'd get back to LA and he'd get home, he'd put his bag in his house and it was always ready to go. And if it had been sat there for a little while, it'd be a bit fucking stinky and that. But I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example of his kind of mindset like that. The things that make me think it might be right true is the way he said his hair was all wrapped around because they used to do that. So, I mean, he certainly took no bullshit, for sure. He was at the Rainbow one night and he had basically his seat at the Rainbow, which is basically where their equivalent of a fruit machine is, but it wasn't gambling. It was like high scores. And the guy comes up to him and the worst thing you could ever do, well, not the worst thing, but the thing that you could see he'd get a little bit irked was if people started bugging him while he was playing machines. He was obsessed with machines, And I think a lot of that was to do with, amphetamines and just being in the zone. So if anybody came in and broke that zone, he'd be a little bit shitty. So anyway, this guy comes up to him and he's like, yeah, I'm so-and-so, the drummer from the metal band, the Scorpions, like that. And Lem, he didn't even look at him and just went, Scorpions aren't a metal band. And just carried on playing. This guy just shrunk away.
Oh, good. That is the sort of thing. I mean, these are the sort of things that I've heard of and I always hope are true. Yeah, that's fucking brilliant. Picking up on that, and we kind of touched on it a second ago, his dislike of being called a metal band. I love, listen, I fucking love Motörhead. I think they're one of the greatest bands ever. But, when he says, we're a blues band, we're a rock and roll band, I've seen that band live. I've heard that distortion. I've had my ears ringing for 3 days after seeing them.
Yeah.
I love Lemmy, but come on. They're a metal band, aren't they?
Arguably not. Because if you think about when they basically started off the back of punk. I mean, to him, like metal came from, stuff like Saxon and bands like that, is what I would imagine what he would consider to be the start of metal. I think because they were a precursor to that, they were their own thing and more inherently linked to rock and roll and to punk stuff. I would say they've definitely. I guess it's that old argument. If a band really influences a genre, did they become part of that genre?
Yeah, that's true.
He did like a lot of metal stuff. He had some of the. I mean, there's one of the things we really bonded with. He had some really wacky music tastes. Like his favorite band was Evanescence.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is
never have guessed that.
Exactly. Yeah. And if he'd have said what's your second one, he would have said the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band.
Right.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Which I don't. Have you ever heard any Bonzo stuff?
My dad did me a tape when I was a kid, and it had one of their songs on it. And was it Urban Spaceman? Is that them?
Yeah. So that's kind of like that's the commercial Bonzo stuff. I recommend going and checking out some of their like kind of more out there stuff. Like Vivian Stanshall was just incredible. But yeah, I mean his music taste was really varied. But just to go back to your original question, I would say that they were more of an influencer of metal than metal.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, obviously that kind of double kick drum thing that every thrash band, and then what happened after post Metallica with extreme metal and stuff. I mean, it kind of can all be linked back to Motörhead, and also really they're just really loud and they're really heavy, and that is kind of the essence of the essence of metal and punk and rock and roll. So I get it, but yeah, they always felt pretty heavy metal to me. But like you say, that might have been because they were doing it before everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Dan, on your first day on the job working with Motörhead, this kind of dream scenario that you've had fall into your hands. What was the first day? How were you feeling on that first day? And talk me through it. What happened?
So my first day was actually a day off with the band.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So that was my first day. And I like I said, I'd driven back from Munich, and then gone to Oxford, and then met up with the band bus, and we'd gone up to Glasgow for a day off. And I was on the crew bus. The band bus was already there, and I got to the Hilton Hotel in Glasgow, which for me, I'd never stayed in a Hilton before at the time, and I was a bit like, "Whoa, this is a bit fucking rock and roll." Checked in, got up to my room, and there was absolutely nothing in my room, nothing. So there was basically a mattress in my room, right? So I'm like, "What the fuck?" I'm like, "Right, I'm Going to ring down to the reception. They'll clearly give me the wrong room. Go to find, there's no phone, right? So then I'm like, I'm going to have to go down there. I'm going to just nip for a piss, go for a piss, flush the toilet. It doesn't flush. Literally doesn't flush. And I go downstairs and speak to the reception, and they're like, we had a call yesterday from Dr. Campbell, who said that, you've just got out of suicide watch, so we've had to remove anything that you could harm yourself with from your room.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, what? And they literally had, like, apparently they'd had this crisis meeting I later found out they'd had this crisis meeting at the hotel about me coming and staying there, and that what they'd had to remove from the room. So there was no fridge in there was no phone in there was no kettle in there. Anything that had a cable that I could have, like, wrapped around my neck was gone. Like, all of the bed sheets were gone because I could have done that with it. The bathroom, the mirrors had been removed in case I smashed it and used it to cut myself. All of this stuff, right? And so I said to them down at the reception, I'm like, it's my first day starting this job. They're clearly pulling a wind up and da-da-da-da-da. And she just looks at me, like, straight-faced and went, "He said you would say that." And I'm just like, fuck. Like, because what do you say to that? I literally, like, so my first day working for Motörhead was in this hotel room in Glasgow with just a mattress. And then, it's obviously at the time, like, I mean, me and Campbell had a really, really good relationship later on, but at the time I didn't know the guy, but like, so I couldn't really ring him up and be like, "You fucking prick." Like, so yeah, that was the first thing we did. And then we went out drinking. But my first day on the job would be the Glasgow show the next day. It was cool. I guess it was, so I was given a radio that was basically the crew radio, and me and Lem had a separate channel on that. And from the moment I met him until the last time I saw him, he always just called me boy. So so the radio go, "Boy." I'm like, yeah. And then like, it sounds like he said it shitty, but it was quite endearing. So my first day was, it was quite daunting, to be honest, but it was busy enough that you didn't have time to get anxious. So I was running around sorting out interviews, and then so it was almost like when the band went on stage, and it went on to be that way. When the band went on stage, it was my time to actually take a breath. say running around, like, sorting out the press schedule, sorting out where we're going to go afterwards, because that was a big part of my job. Was like, well, what's in town? What are we going to do? What can we do that's fun? So that was kind of part of it. And then obviously getting to know the crew was something that I kind of really went out of my way to do, and especially the old boys, like I say, Eagle and Hobbsy. It was a pleasure to tour with those guys because they had so many stories, and you knew you'd done a good job when they told you you'd done a good job. Yeah. Like and I'm not saying that the rest of the crew didn't, but to me, I know a lot of people call themselves technicians and they call themselves all this stuff. Like I was proud to be a roadie, So to me, those old school guys who were roadies giving you some sort of props and some sort of respect meant the world to me.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that is great. So you worked for 7 years with Motörhead. Was that kind of 7 years non-stop?
Yeah. So that was not just Motörhead as well. I was doing Lemmy's other band, Headcat. Yeah. So Lemmy had a side project band with Slim Jim and Danny B. Harvey, basically just doing rock and roll covers. So doing like Buddy Holly songs and Little Richard songs and stuff like that, and doing it in tiny little venues, just trolling around like the States, doing small club shows and stuff, which was really cool. But yeah, it was pretty much full on and international. What
were some of the sort of big standout moments from that period? I mean, I'm sure there were plenty for you, but both, I guess, personally and professionally, was there anything that kind of stood out from that period that was really special?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first time going to South America was something I'd always wanted to do, and it was like another world. A lot of the Motörhead crew were old Sepultura crew, so they were all Brazilian.
Right, cool.
So, yeah. So like Eddie, Rogério, all those people, they were all old Sepultura crew. And so to go there with them and to actually do all that stuff, and just the shows there were insane. People letting off flares in the middle of the crowd and like huge football chants and all this stuff was just incredible. So that was a real standout moment. And then to me, it's going to sound really weird, but the things that I really valued was the travel times. So just hanging out with Lem, just me and Lem cruising through an airport or being in a car and going somewhere. Like, I guess shows-wise, obviously shows like Wacken and shows like that were really standout. Because they were just huge, and it was the huge production. And it was always a treat, shows that were big enough that we could get the bomber out. So that was, So the first time, like, doing a show, do you know what, actually, and it's a bit of a traditionalist, but probably my favourite show we ever did was at Hammersmith with the bomber.
Well, I can understand that. Yeah. As a Motörhead fan, as anyone who's even kind of vaguely interested in Motörhead, that's got to be proper bucket list stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And especially like, before the show, messing around with the bomber, it basically run on a joystick. So getting to mess around with the bomber and stuff like that was really cool. But yeah, I mean, just getting to travel and to go to like good places and with good people is a blessing. So I mean, as much as it was all a highlight shows wise, probably Wacken and like I said, South America and stuff like that. Personal wise was getting to play Killed by Death with Motörhead on my birthday would have been really
cool. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was mad. It was in Helsinki, and so my radio went as it normally would. It went, boy, and I'm like, yeah. He's like, come here. And I'm like, oh, fuck. What have I done now? Because I was always slinking off to do little missions and stuff, which I wanted to. But I'm go to his dressing room, and he's like, you're playing Killed by Death with us tonight. I'm like, I'm fucking not. He's like, yeah, you are. You need to learn it. So then I sat with Campbell and learned it, and then played it in Helsinki, and there was literally probably like 8,000 people going, who's that fat bastard? But it was cool. It was really good. I had all the crew fucking with me. But there's probably a handful of people who can say, yeah, they played on stage with Motörhead, and so to me that was ridiculous. That's something that coming from a very bad socioeconomic town in the northeast of England, saying that, I wonder if you get to play on stage with Motörhead, I'd have gone, you're full of shit. But to do it was probably something that I held really close to me.
Yeah. Were you, I mean, obviously this is, I'm sure just talking to you, you were fully aware of this, but I mean, for a personal story, to deviate for a personal story of mine for a minute, I was at the Metal Hammer Golden Gods Awards in 2013, and by the side of the stage, before everything was getting set up, as Motörhead were getting the big award that night, and they rolled their amps and their gear and their I mean, you were probably there, I would have thought, but all the gear got kind of rolled past and you just saw that stamp, that Motörhead logo. And I just remember being like, getting an actual, like the hairs on my arms sort of stand up on edge, going like, that's actually, there's just something so iconic about that band. Did you feel like the whole time you were there, were you like, my God, I am literally working with one of the biggest kind of and most iconic bands that have ever played this music ever?
Yeah, every day. So I mean, for me, it was the privilege of road crewing. So that's, you know, the pinnacle of road crewing, to be working for Motörhead. And again, like you got that buzz yourself, like as part of the road crew, where you would go to a festival and, you know, like you would feel it almost coming back from people, that tingle, where they'd be like, fuck, the Motörhead crew's here. That's the Motörhead crew. You know, and you'd be getting stuff out the trucks and stuff like that. And sometimes, like, especially, for me, it was the little things that no one else saw or shouldn't have seen. So stuff like at certain festivals, if the band were flying in, it was the first festival they're doing, they'd do their whole set in the back of the truck before they went on. Right. So they'd set up like little stacks and stuff in there, and they'd do their whole set in there before they did their set. So it was almost like a private gig for the festival crew who loved it, absolutely loved it. But yeah, you definitely had that pride, you know, like when you saw the stacks come out, or you saw the banner come down, or the bomber, or you know, all of that stuff. It really gave you a sense of pride in what you were doing, for sure. And again, it gave you satisfaction in the thing that it, like you say, it gave you a buzz and stuff. Like it was something so iconic. It gave you a buzz to know that you were helping provide that buzz to people.
Yeah. So what happened in 2012 when you stopped working with Motörhead? What was the reason for you doing that?
So, I mean, a couple of reasons really. The main one was my little girl was born.
Okay.
Yeah, she was born in 2012, and you know, when you've toured for that long, and you're on different tour buses every other week and all this stuff, and you find common themes and stuff, and especially talking to, I'm a big fan of bus drivers. So I'd be the guy on the tour bus who sat at the front with the bus driver during the night drive, just chilling and chatting. And more often than not, the first thing that they would say was like, "Oh, I don't see the kids anymore." And I'd be like, I don't want to end up like that. Yeah. I really don't. So I kind of promised myself that would be the time that it was my time to stop having fun and start passing on stuff to my daughter and to start focusing on family. And then the other side of that as well is, and you know, it's not something I've really spoke about a lot, but it was a very messy time and a lot of shit kind of got on top, you know? So it was almost like a precipice. It was either going to go very badly, very quickly in my kind of mental health, physical health, or as what it was, or it was going to go very good where I became a supportive parent and kind of went off to do other things. So I guess a lot of the pinnacle for me was almost like a head cat tour in the States, where I was literally the only crew guy on it, and I was just run ragged. I was just exhausted, and part of it was self-inflicted. So part of it was, you know, too much partying, too much doing all this stuff, too much, you know, like, and not getting enough sleep. And then the other part of it was kind of like trying to put on a production worthy of, you know, the Motörhead label when you're the only one crew guy on there. It's hard work.
That does sound like hard work. That sounds like a lot of pressure, obviously, to be working with that band and with a family coming. I mean, I can fully appreciate why you would give up. And, you know, 7 years working with one of the greatest bands that have ever been, and the most, like you rightly say, the most iconic road crew of all time. It's you got to be pretty proud of yourself. That's a pretty good run.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've got absolutely no regrets. It was an absolutely amazing time, and it was a time that if I got the opportunity again at the same age, I would just jump at it again and again and again. But you know, like it's one of those things. It becomes. It's you know the phrase like the familiarity breeds contempt. I won't say it was contempt, but it almost breeds complacency in the way that I've done everything I want to do. Like, I know that this machine doesn't rely on just me. So if I remove myself from it, this machine's still going to go on, and I can go and do things and focus on family and focus on, you know, well-being and education. So I went back to university straight after straight after Motörhead. It was a really kind of educational time and a really fun time, man. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously memories that I'll keep with me forever and absolutely love. But at that point in time in 2012, it was the right time for me to call it a day.
And then Ian went up and set up your own venue for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I went and did a BA honours in business management in Norwich, and used my student loan to put the deposit down on a venue, which is probably not the smartest of moves.
Well,
yeah, it's probably not the smartest of moves. But you know what? Like, I didn't realise how much I'd missed touring. It was almost like a mourning process, and I know it sounds really fucking dramatic or whatever, but it almost was. It was like a mourning process of like something that had been part of my life for so long to then not have it, and it was weird on every level as well. I mean, you need to realise that like my missus, I only spent a month of the year with her, pretty much for that time, you know, like for all the time I was with Motörhead. So it was almost like we had to get to know each other again and all this stuff, you know. But yeah, I went on and set up this venue. It was an old coaching inn that had basically been, it was a legendary former venue in Norwich as far as legendary venues in Norwich go, but it had been sat dilapidated for years. And I just thought one day, like, I had to do like a title search to find out who actually still owned it, and got in touch with them and cut a deal with them to kind of like, and it was fucked. Like literally there was rain pouring through it and all this stuff, like when we got it. And me and all my friends kind of did it as like true DIY music and DIY fucking do it yourself fix up as well. So we then did that. So yeah, that was called the Owl Sanctuary, which was named after Alan Partridge.
Yeah, keeping that tradition of UK comedy in rock and roll alive. 100%.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So yeah, we did that for a little while, and so we used to. I guess one of the things that we were really good at was doing what we used to call Monday night sellouts. So a lot of bands, like when they tour, would take Monday nights off because it's a very quiet night to be doing a show somewhere. So on that night, they've obviously got hotel expenses, crew expenses, like all of this stuff, and they're gonna, like, you know, there's the chances are that they're not going to sell any merch. So I would reach out to booking agents and go, "We've got a venue here. Come and play here cheap. We've got bunk beds upstairs where all your bands and crew can stay. We've got a recording studio here, and we've got screen printing in this venue as well." So it was like, you know, come and play here, come and play cheap. You're going to sell merch. You're going to have a good night. You've got somewhere to stay. Your costs are going to be zero. You're actually going to make money. So we got a lot of bands come and do that, which was really cool. We got bands that were bigger than the venue coming and playing the venue. And it'd sell out super quick, you know. Bands like Popoli itself and the Subways and bands like that would come and do little shows, and basically pub gigs. So we'd get production bands to come and do pub gigs, which was really cool.
Well, I'm just looking at you. You got Biohazard, Every Time I Die, Parma Violets, Agnostic Front. I mean, Agnostic Front and Every Time I Die in front of 150 people, that's got to be a fun night for sure.
Yeah, it was 100%, man. Yeah, so I guess, like that. I mean, Biohazard is a prime example. They were a band who had a Monday night off, and we put them on, and it was sold out. It was a crazy show, and it created more of a scene. And like we always used to do this. So I'm going to go off a little bit, kind of like industry booking wise here, but I really resented the way that modern booking agents book full packages that don't include local bands. Like, it's really detrimental to the music scene. It's really detrimental. Local bands aren't going to get their craft any better, or their skills any better, or even connections or communication any better if they can't play gigs with bands that are bigger than them, you know? So we always used to make sure we had local bands on the bill for all of these shows as well. So that's something that, you know, with that, I'm really stoked about that. For that period of time, we really give the Norwich music scene a kick up the arse. Like, it's really good.
Yeah, that's great. That's one of the things. I mean, that does drive me mad. That kind of not to call them out in case they want to sponsor the podcast, but the kind of O2 sponsored venues who are just like, no, unless you're one of these bands that are on this bill, then, you know, that you never get a local band opening at Brixton or wherever anymore. And I think it's absolute bullshit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it is. I mean, especially when venues are closing down the way they are, and those like initial runs of a band's progression are being removed. Like, people should be supporting local music. Every band is a local band somewhere. You know, like it's true. Like every band is a local band from wherever they're from. So I mean, no matter what size they are, they started as a small band, and that should be supported and be promoted as such. So I always found it really frustrating when you would get those huge package things that came through. But yeah, I mean, with the Owl Sanctuary, it was again just as we get towards the end of chatting about that, it became one of those things where it was like, be careful what you wish for, because the whole reason I stopped touring was because I wanted to spend time with my family. But I ended up basically doing a 3-year-long tour, 150 yards from my house. Because, like, you know, by the time, I mean, my little girl had started school by the time we were doing the Owl Sanctuary. And I would finish that late, that by the time I get home, by the time I wake up in the morning, she's gone to school. By the time she gets home from school, I'm at the venue. And it just kind of went that way, which is part of the reason that I backed out of the Owl Sanctuary in the end. But for those first few years of the initial setup of it, it was something we were really proud of, and it was something that, you know, it was stuck to get the recognition that I got and to get the bands that played there. And then kind of towards the end of that, I started trickling back into doing bits of tour work as well.
You toured as Adam from Killswitch Engage's guitar tech for a little bit, is that right? He's a fun guy as well, isn't he? He's a lovely man.
Yeah, he is, yeah, he's an absolute dude, yeah. Again, like, the reason that we bonded was old school hardcore. It was as simple as that. We just got chatting about bands like Gorilla Biscuits and stuff like that. So to go out and do that, and then, you know, the singer Jesse is a huge fan of UK punk music and UK ska punk music, which you wouldn't think of. But he's, you know, one of his favourite bands is the Inner Terrestrials. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, to tour with them was absolutely amazing. So we came out and did US with them, with a band called Let Live and a band called Under Oath, and Let Live were absolutely fucking incredible. Let Live are probably the best band of the last decade, I think. But, you know, that's just, do you know what? I would tend to agree with you. I tend to agree with you. And especially like at that point, they were first on and they were just hungry, man. Like, you know, they were just ripping it up every single night. And it wasn't like it was a formulaic rip it up every night. It was just spontaneous fucking carnage. And they were like to me, what an ideal hardcore band should be. Very proficient and very good at what they're doing, but slightly intimidating. Yeah. So that if you're in the crowd, you're like, fuck, am I safe here? Like, what the fuck? Like, is everything all right? Like, you know, and it has that edginess to it. And they completely encompass that. And they were absolutely amazing. I remember seeing Let Live for the first time, and I remember thinking, I haven't seen a band that reminds me of Refused or At the Drive-In or the Dillinger Escape Plan or even, you know, we mentioned This Girl. This Girl were wild live, and I just thought that was something that was, you know, that kind of spontaneous rush of energy from a band. You weren't really getting that with bands so much anymore, and it was the first time that I'd heard someone and gone, my God, this is like hearing Glassjaw again for the first time, and it was, super exciting. I really, really love Let Live. They're amazing. Yeah, definitely. Like, and there were such like they're screwed on people as well. Like they knew exactly what they wanted. They knew who. I'm not saying people were trying to fuck them over, but they knew to. When anything was offered to them, there would be one of those bands that would sit and chat about it and go, well, why are we being offered this? What is the person offering us this got to gain out of it? Like, and what have we got to lose out of it? So they'd be very methodical and very decision-making about how they operated. And it was really cool to tour them at that stage. But yeah, I mean, working with Adam was absolutely brilliant. Like Adam and Joel, like, and Jesse, just absolutely solid dudes. So, I mean, some of the things Adam used to come out with on stage, like, just be like, dude, you can't say that. Like, there was some that were like just genuinely funny. Like, he would say, like, do you know what? I smell like a fucking pet shop. Get used to it. He'd be like, oh yeah, fair. But then I think we were at Gross Rock. He came out and he goes, how's it going, Gross Rock? Your weather's like I like my girls. Cold, wet, and in the teens. And I'm like, dude, like, fuck, man. Like, he's got a potty mouth, hasn't he, Adam? Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah. Do you know, like, my favourite thing about Adam and working with Adam as a guitarist as well was just how fucking good he is. Like, he's brilliant. And a ridiculous shredder. And how much, like, other kind of metal guitarists, and it's obviously based on, like, some sort of envy or jealousy, like, don't like him because of it. Like, so I don't know if you ever heard, he had a bit of a feud with Kerry King. He did, yeah. For wearing a tutu on stage at Mayhem Festival, I thought it was. When Kerry King didn't think that bands at Mayhem Festival should be wearing tutus on stage. Yeah, 100%. And like, if you actually analyse that, what he's actually saying is I can wear a fucking tutu and I'm still a better guitarist than you, dude. Because, you know, I mean, as good as Kerry King is, like, Adam's ridiculous. Like, because I mean, I play a bit of guitar, but like, not only does he shred, but he can play other styles of music incredibly well. He's just such a well-rounded musician. And I think a lot of guitarists kind of held that against him, you know? The fact that he could spend all his time fucking around, you know, dressing in a rabbit suit or, you know, doing tequila shots with one hand while soloing with the other. They held that against him like, oh, this can't be fun. Like, you can't have fun with this. Like, what is wrong with you? When the reality is like, at the time, metal music had become very generic and very stale and very predictable, you know? Like, all band promos were, oh, here's some gloomy guys stood in an industrial estate, you know? Like, kind of all wearing black T-shirts, all doing all this stuff, where he stood out. And, you know, so it was amazing to work with him, and I learned a lot from those guys. And just the way that they rolled off stage as well was really cool. Like, so every day, we'd give our per diems to Jesse, and Jesse would go to the market and would buy all different foods, and then he'd prep it all before the gig, and then he would cook it after the gig. So we used to call him the chef. So yeah, so every gig after the gig we'd play like cornholes and, you know, like have a barbecue and stuff like that. So it was just a really good way of touring.
Yeah, man, that's great. I mean, with regards to Adam as well, people forget, or people don't acknowledge as much. He was originally the drummer in Killswitch Engage. So it's not even like the guitar was his first instrument and he's that good at it. Plus he's like produced so many great records as well, from Partway Drive to the Acacia Strain to blah, 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 whatever. And Jesse, Jesse, getting Jesse back, I thought has been brilliant for the band. And he actually put I don't know if you heard it, but he put a hardcore album out recently, a kind of old school Oi inspired hardcore called The Weapon. I don't know if you've heard that. It's really good. Totally. Really good.
Yeah, so that's got Joshy playing bass on it, who's Killswitch's guitar tech now. And yeah, I mean, he's a huge Motörhead fan as well. So there's actually a picture, like, I'm just going to digress a little bit because I've just thought of it, but there's a picture of Joshy with Lemmy, like, at one point, and I'm stood in the background just downing a Jack and Coke, and we didn't know each other at that point. And it was only when he shared it on Facebook, I was like, dude, that's me in the background. Like, what the fuck? Like, and I didn't remember it. But yeah, like, they love their hardcore. All of those guys love their hardcore. And Joshy as well. Such a solid crew guy. I actually run into those guys probably about 6-7 months ago when they played in Canberra. And it was so cool to catch up with those guys, and especially take my little girls along to the show, you know. So it was cool to have her meet them all and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think with Jesse, it's good for him to get these things out of his system and have all these different things going on, because he's one of those guys. He's always thinking, he's always writing, he's always, you know, there's always something going on.
I mean, that sounded like a lot of fun, but it ultimately you did end up, as we said at the top, moving to Australia. So how that decision came about, and I know you're writing a book about your experiences with Lemmy as well. So is that kind of what's taken up your kind of full-time life these days? Yeah,
I mean, a little bit. I mean, so I did do some other tour stuff after that. I went and so I actually got really lucky. So I was finishing up my degree at the same time as Billy from the Subways was doing his degree. So when he could tour, I could tour, and a mutual friend, and it links back right down to the early days. So their front of house engineer is a guy called Steve Gurney, who was 100 Reasons front of house engineer. And was like, dude, I've got these really sporadic, weird tour dates with the Subways. Do you want to come out and do them? So it was literally like to the point of we'd fly out to South Africa for the weekend. So yeah, and to do one show and then come back and do stuff like that. So I did do that for a little while. And then with the Owl Sanctuary, we had like a big old lease dispute go on with that building. And that's when I kind of decided, you know what, like, we moved it to a new building, and I was just like, you know, it just doesn't feel the same for me. And the whole idea behind the Owl Sanctuary was to be almost like a springboard to get into Australia. So I decided that was the time. I mean, these days, so I came here, and actually, it's weird how far the Motörhead things go. So I got here and applied for pretty much every fucking job that I could, because, you know, it's a new country. We're coming here and trying to find these things. And I ended up working at a law firm, which was insane. So I got the job there because one of the directors was a huge Motörhead fan.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, she's a huge Motörhead fan, huge kind of metal fan. And that's how I got the job working at the law firm, and ended up getting into like marketing management and stuff like that. So then after that, worked in kind of multi-sector kind of agency marketing stuff for a little while. And then I'm just kind of in the process of like kind of setting up my own business at the minute. The idea behind that is that I can finish off the book. So I keep kind of like coming to it, trying to get get out what I want to say. And instead of just spewing it all out and then editing it, I keep doing it chapter at a time and stuff. So, But yeah, I think it's probably a couple months more work on that, and then the first draft of it will be ready. But it's actually been really good to go back. I've got like kind of little Google Notes on my phone when I remembered, like just random times you'll remember something and you'll, fuck, I better write that down so that I can remember to write about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I did keep very basic tour diaries at the time, which a lot of my notes I like kind of go back and look at, and it gets the kind of thought process going to remember stuff again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I look forward to reading that book. It's called God's PA, I believe, as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and then it's from the joke from Airheads.
Yeah,
I remember the joke. Yeah. So that's I do get a lot of kind of religious groups following me on Instagram, which is quite good.
Boy, they're in for a shock, aren't they, when they read the book?
I know. I know. So yeah, that's kind of like that's the title of it. So yeah, there is a couple of podcasts that I've done as well. One of them was with James Jonah, who was the Motörhead tour bus driver, which I'm not saying it because it's my podcast, but I recommend listening to it just to hear Jonah's stories, because Jonah's just got some great stuff to say.
So obviously, I think before we kind of wrap up, if it's not too difficult for you to talk about and if it's not too personal, obviously when Lemmy passed away, it was a massive thing. I remember being like really quite upset around that period when that happened, because we all sort of, I guess, believed that he was going to go on forever. I guess you kind of genuinely look at someone like that who's such an icon and you think, they're indestructible, but nobody really is. And it was a deeply, deeply sad thing when Lemmy went, and the outpouring of everybody from Triple H to Dave Grohl to just general metal fans on the street was massive. How did you find out about it? And what was your kind of, how did you feel around that time?
So I found out, I got a message from Wes Wachowski, who was one of the directors of the Lemmy movie. And he messaged me and he was like, look, it's not broke yet, but this has happened. So that's how I found out. And it's a weird kind of position for me, but because I was so close with him, like 24 hours a day for 7 years pretty much, I saw bits of his frailties, you know. He wasn't this like, you know, big chested demigod to me. He was a 60-something year old guy, you know, and he did have his frailties, and he was definitely like, you know, paying the price for a lot of his misadventure in his youth, you know, like same as I'm getting there now, you know. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't absolutely fucking devastated by it. And especially at that time, it was a really hard time for me because I had one of my friends kind of pass away at the same time, and Lem pass away at the same time, and I had to deal with and I was involved in a van crash at the same time as well, and as well as trying to sort out this lease dispute that was going on with the Alzheimer tree. So what I did is I always promised him and I promised myself that the day I died, I would just go and have a drink somewhere and just remember the good times. So that's what I did. I backed off social media and it's probably for about a week. I just kind of chilled out, remembered the good times, listened to some of like the live recording bits and bobs that I've got, and just remembered like the guy for who he was, not for how he died, to be honest.
Yeah, it was very, very sad, and that's probably, you know, I think a lot of people now, they want to jump on social media straight away and show people how much they care, don't they? But that's not really the real way of actually caring about someone. Yeah. So, yeah. It's
probably a little bit controversial, but I don't think he should have been touring, to be honest. But it wasn't for me to decide, and it wasn't my ship to run. But in my opinion, he shouldn't have been on the road at that point. And it was incredibly sad. And I know there's a few other people who thought that way as well. I know Mike Muir put out a thing about it, just saying that, you know, he shouldn't have been on the road. So it was a sad thing. But then, you know, he was a very stubborn guy. If you'd have said to him, you shouldn't be on the road, he'd be like, fuck you, I'm going to go tour twice. That's the sort of dude he was. So.
Can you remember the sort of last interaction that you had with him?
He wrote me a few letters. He was a very big letter writer. So when my daughter was born, he wrote me a nice letter, like kind of to me and Sarah and stuff like that. I guess the last kind of gig interaction I had with him was it was in LA at his house after the Headcat tour, and we were just sat around his house just playing Xbox and just fucking around and just having drinks. And that's probably one of my kind of the last kind of solid memory that I have of him. And then him plying me with speed and me going to the airport and trying to fumble my way through LAX check-in would be probably it. Like, it's not something that I'm proud of, but it's a good memory. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably the last interaction that I had with him. Genuine kind of sat down, couple of mates chilling out interaction. Gig wise would be the last Headcat shows. I think the last show that we did was Seattle at the Corazon, I think it was. So yeah, that's probably the last gig thing.
All right, well, Dan, thanks so much for chatting to us. But before we go, we always end the podcast on asking our guests what their best and worst ever day on the job has been. So have you got a story for the very finest moment of your career and also the most tragic?
So the best I ever had was the Lemmy movie premiere, because it was just fucking ridiculous. Everything about that day was absolutely ridiculous. So there's me and Lemmy sat in this little box, like the royal box at this fucking theatre. There's just me, Lemmy, and Triple H, right? And then
wow.
So that's, but that's the normal part of it. Like, it's just this is where it gets ridiculous. So halfway through the film, like, Lemmy leaned over to me and was like, "I need a piss." I'm like, "What the fuck do you want me to do?" Like, he's like, "No, I need a piss." And I'm like, "Well, go for a piss." And he's like, "I can't." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Because it'll look like I'm walking out of my own film, like in disgust." And he's like, "What am I going to do?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know, man. I was like, just run for a piss. I'm sure people are watching the film. They're not going to be watching it." He's like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that." And so he went searching around like this thing and found like a champagne bucket in this royal box, right? And he took a piss in this champagne bucket, right? And so he then sat back down. We watched the rest of the film. And like kind of a day or so later, we get a call from Adam Parsons, and he rings my phone and he's like, "We've had this theatre on the phone, like, blah, blah, blah. Somebody was pissing in buckets in that roll box. Like, what the fuck's been going on, blah, blah, blah." And I've got him on speakerphone, and me and Lemon just in absolute fucking hysterics. Just in absolute hysterics. And we're just going, "Oh, I don't know what you're on about, mate." And he's like, Was it you? Like going to me. And I'm like, no. And then he's going to Len, "Was it you?" And he's like, "Well, it's like we were getting told off, like as like naughty fucking school kids or something." And then he's like, and then he's angling like it's me who's done it. And he's going, "Was it you?" And I'm like, no, it wasn't me. I was like, "The amount you pay me, I don't even have a pot to piss in," and literally just put the phone down on him. Like, it was just like, fuck. So that was probably my favourite day, was just, full on fucking hijinks and just being involved with that. The worst time was me and Campbell had a stay awake competition. Who could stay awake the longest? In South America, so you can guess how it's going. It started in Colombia and worked its way through Brazil. And I ended up fucking hallucinating. Like, absolutely just seeing shit, because I'd been awake for that long. And I got it into my head that me and Campbell had this huge argument. I just went full on paranoid. Got it into my head that me and Campbell had this huge argument, and that he was going to come and fucking like do me in my hotel room. So I ended up just fucking potting around my hotel room, and I ring him and I'm like, "Dude, like, I know we're not seeing eye to eye right now, but I really need your help," because I was seeing shit. And he's like, "Oh, fuck." So he took that to be, "I've run out of drugs." So he then comes up to the room and he's like, sees that. So when he's talking to me, there's literally the outline of figures behind him and the curtains blowing and stuff like that, which they're not. It's just in my fucking mind. He sees what state I'm in. He goes and gets Hobbsy. And Hobbsy took pity on me and gave me some Valium and stroked my head to sleep. And then they did the gig that night without me because I was catching up on sleep. So that was probably one of the worst days I've ever fucking had, was thinking I was actually losing my shit. That's
pretty scary. I mean, to be fair, if you're going to stay awake for a long time in any country, Brazil and Colombia are quite good, because obviously there's lots of coffee.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, we just drank so much coffee, dude. So much coffee. Like, you won't believe it. Coffee and Pro Plus, man. It was non-stop. That was probably one of the, and when we checked into the hotel as well, I remember like the woman at the reception being super fucking freaked out by me, and me being freaked out that she was freaked out by me, and like Tim Butcher just looking at her and going, "He see phantomas." Like, so she basically said to him, like, "He sees ghosts." Like, and this woman's face just dropped and was just like, "Oh fuck." But yeah, that was probably one of the worst things. And then, obviously Lem's death is in there and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, there was thankfully, there was so much more good than there was bad. Yeah, I think that's probably like it when it comes to really kind of bad shit, was just running myself fucking ragged,
Wow.
And not and basically being a fucking idiot.
Yeah, you've only got yourself to blame, Dan. You've only got
yourself 100%. It's complete self-inflicted fucking idiocy, man. But I do it all again in a fucking heartbeat.
Absolutely. Well, dude, it's been lovely chatting to you. Some great stories, and you must have seen some things. I feel like we could have this podcast could have gone for about 8 hours with all the things that you must have seen, whether or not you remember them all, but the things that you've seen over the years. But dude, it's been lovely chatting to you. Good luck with your book. And
thank you, man.
Thank you very much, man, for chatting to us. It's been really good. And well, I suppose it must be quite late where you are now, so I'm going to let you get to bed.
Yeah, no, it's about 8 o'clock-ish. I'm going to go catch up with my little girl and see what she's doing and catch up with my missus and stuff, man. But no, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Thank you.
It's been nice talking to you today, man. So.
Cheers, buddy. Speak to you
Thanks,
soon.
man.
Cheers.
Big love. Bye-bye.
So there you go. What a lovely man. That was Dan Hawcroft. As I said, 8 years as Lemmy's PA and road manager. I want to say a really massive, massive thank you for Dan coming on and, you know, opening up. And obviously we went to a couple of places which might have been a little bit difficult for him, and he didn't shirk that at all. And, you know, I really, really appreciate his honesty and his candor in doing that. It's been really, really great talking to him. I couldn't really hold back how much of a massive Motörhead fan I am. Thank you very much as well for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with our final show of the entire series. It's a big one. A really, really big one. Also, as I said, thank you to Signature Brew. Go over to signaturebrew.co.uk and you can get some lovely, lovely music industry based beverages from those guys. Thanks to them for supporting the podcast as ever. Thanks to you for listening. As I said, you can find us on all of our socials at Road Crew Pod on Twitter, and we're on Instagram and Facebook as well if you'd like to give us a little follow. We'll be back next week. Really, really appreciate you listening, and we will see you then.